Hi, this is Anthony Parent of IRS Medic, and I'm a little fired up this morning. I got to say, I've been really excited about doing this podcast, and hopefully I can keep it somewhat managed, my emotions somewhat managed. And I'm just going to start off with it. I'm going to start off. We're going to be talking about Section 965 of the Internal Revenue Code, the transition tax. And this is a tax that is getting a lot of attention. The Supreme Court is going to oversee it. And essentially, we got to go back in time a little bit to figure out what exactly happened to transition tax. How did it come into being? And as of 2017, President Trump was looking for Tax Cuts and Jobs Acts. Kevin McCarthy, as chair of the House Ways and Means, as typical fashion of our Republican representative in Congress, he definitely sold out his constituency and he went for the big business. The transition tax, as John will explain later, does not hit the large businesses. They escape, but rather the little guys like the more, this is who it goes after 100%. Whether or not you like President Trump or not, he signed this law into existence. And I'm actually a supporter of Donald Trump. And I can tell you, this is the worst tax law ever written, ever signed into law. And it's absolutely, in the words of John, it is shocking in its depravity. So the question is, why aren't Democrats attacking McCarthy and Trump? This is their baby. This is their baby that rewarded big business and hammered the little guy. This has no defense to it whatsoever. So where are the attacks? They're missing. And in fact, we have not attacks, but we have wild, crazy support for the transition tax by Democrats, by the opposition. Here's an article written by Jonathan Zasloff. The Supreme Court's new big tax case demands Clarence Thomas recusal. And here's another similar article, basically the same article by someone else. Billionaire linked U.S. think tank behind Supreme Court wealth tax case lobbying, which is a little confusing of a title because, as we'll say. And so here this is what we have here. Slate and Guardian are writing essentially the same article that we have no proof of corruption, but we know Thomas is recouped and Colito too. Joe and Hunter Biden aren't mentioned. And the thing is, the transition tax is talked about if it's a great thing. They love it. They want it. They are, and if you even read their articles, and this is where it gets a little much, to say, hey, look, the 16th Amendment authorizes an income tax. We all agree to that to some degree. The transition tax is a wealth tax, not authorized by the Constitution. So if we look at what they say Clarence and Thomas and Alito are corrupt for wanting to overturn it. So, oh my God, this is just way too much what's going on. John, can you help us out with this whatsoever? Make sense of what's going on here with these articles written, this case going on. Can you help us figure out what's going on?
I doubt it. All right. I'll give it a little bit of a try.
Okay.
So, we all know the facts leading up to the Moore case. Basically, an individual U.S. shareholder living in the United States, presumably relatively small people in the scheme of things, invested in this corporation in India. The evidence is they didn't even expect a return on the investment. They were really doing, at least in part, I think it's fairly clear they were motivated by a sense that this was just a good thing to do, to help humanity. First, they get hit with this, this $15,000 tax, which I agree with the law professors that it's a trivial amount of the tax, but I disagree with their attempt to trivialize the issue because of the trivial amount of the tax. And they should be ashamed of themselves, for trying to use that as a way to minimize the real issue here. But more on that in a second. So basically, it was attacked on the basis that it's not an income tax, it was a wealth tax, and therefore the way it was applied was unconstitutional. And the thing has gone to the Supreme Court. And by the way, I want to emphasize that this particular tax, okay, just, so it doesn't sound like some normal tax. What this tax was based on is individual shareholders of controlled foreign corporations had to, one, go back to 1986 and total the amount of active business income earnings that had been retained in the corporation, which were never subject to U.S. tax for the full 31 period. Total it up then the individual shareholder was expected to say, you know what? I am now required to put the 31 years of income earned by the foreign corporation that was never taxed by the United States. The United States had no jurisdiction to tax. I'm now required to put that on my tax return, even though I never received the income, and pay a tax on that amount, right? In other words, when I say shocking in its depravity, in my usual way, I think I'm putting it rather mildly and conservatively. Okay, because this was an extraordinarily retroactive tax. I mean, the only thing more retroactive could have been to go back to 1776. It's an extraordinarily retroactive tax. I mean, that in itself is unbelievable. It's shocking, whether legal or not. It's shocking in its lack of morality. But I mean, we have that. And then we have that amount is attributed to a real person, the U.S. citizen, a resident shareholder. And then they are required to put that full amount on their tax return as income they have to pay tax on, even though they never receive the income. So what we have is a shockingly retroactive tax on fake income. Now, a lot of people, the theoreticians of the world, will understand what I just said, but because they're pure theoreticians, they won't understand the magnitude of it. So I'm going to put it to them like this. Buddy, how'd you like to get a note from the IRS that you had an unreported $1 million on your last tax return? Okay? Because the effect of this, of course, is, and by the way, $1 million, I mean, that's not a large amount of money. I mean, that would be a very bad return on investment, for Americans abroad who are using this type of thing, as a pension plan, which is encouraged by the laws of their country. So this is what's going on. Now, when it went to the Supreme Court, as you might expect, the challenge, which was based partly on retroactivity and partly on it being a wealth tax and therefore not meeting the 16th Amendment requirement to be income, was rejected and is now being heard by the Supreme Court. But the interesting thing is that the Moores, their lawyers, abandoned the issue of retroactivity, at least officially. And the real question before the court is, and I'm paraphrasing just a little bit, but you'll get the gist of it, is this: in order to qualify as 16th Amendment income, that's the amendment of the Constitution that authorizes the taxation of income, does there have to be, they use the word realization. What it really means is, do you actually have to have received income in order to be taxed on it? Do you actually have to have received it in order for it to qualify as income? Now, that's basically where it is. Now, what is now, here's the thing, okay? As we know, we've talked about this. There's been a lot of discussion over the last years of the U.S. having a wealth tax. There's been an awful lot of discussion over the last few years of the U.S. Taxing unrealized capital gains. The difference being, Elizabeth Warren would say, well, you have $1 billion, therefore you should give some of it to the government. But an unrealized capital gains tax is different. Okay, it's not based on the value. It's based on, well, you have an asset that increased from $100 to $200. The fact that you haven't sold it is irrelevant. We're going to tax you in anticipation of the sale today. But in both cases, you'll notice that, the taxpayer doesn't have any income to pay the tax, right? So that's the issue. Now, I do agree that a lot of the supporters of Moore, I do agree fully, okay, that one of their reasons for supporting Moore, possibly the primary reason, is because their concern is that if this gets upheld, meaning that there's no requirement that income be received in order to be taxed, it opens the door to the constitutionality of something like a wealth tax, right? Or a tax on unrealized capital gains, etc. And, and I think that's a big deal. Okay, that's a big deal. And, as I said in our last podcast, and I'm, again, I'm aiming this squarely at the theoreticians of the world. Okay. you need to understand that the Internal Revenue Code and tax codes generally around the world are the fundamental organizing principle of how society works. So, I mean, if you want to even preserve the possibility of a free society, then you want the more appeal to exceed. Because once Congress gets the ability to define anything, let there be income, and poof, there was income. Once Congress gets the ability to define anything as taxable income, there is no end to the extent that they can regulate your lives. And by the way, this is coming from somebody, who's an independent politically, okay? I mean, I have a certain disdain for all political parties. But I mean, I think that this is the simple fact of the matter. Now, what's happening here, of course, is that, when this thing was drafted, it was really all about the multinationals, right? The Apples, the Googles, the Pfizers. It was really all about them. And what it was a deal made between the multinationals and the government to the effect that, these earnings have never been taxable in the U.S. before, but if you reduce our tax rate, our corporate tax rate from 35% to 21%, then we'll agree to pay a percentage of our retained earnings, okay? And so, I mean, really, that was the quid pro quo. There were other things. Now, what's happening is that, this is it's a highly polarizing issue. And there are a lot of people who, think they wouldn't be affected by this, of course, until they would. And they're violently, it's not so much that they're in support of Trump, but they're absolutely in support of the court coming down with any decision that opens the door to tax wealth, right? Or unrealized capital gains. And these would be overwhelmingly Democrats, of course, right? Overwhelmingly Democrats and academics. And I think mostly tax academics, as far as I can see, okay? So, that's basically, sort of teeing the thing up. Now, the people who've been most damaged by it, and interestingly, numerically, it has impacted far more individuals than these multinational corporate. How many 100 of them, maybe? Whatever. But I mean, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, quite possibly millions, in fact, of individuals have impacted by this. Most of them Americans abroad, right, who are using these so-called foreign corporations. They're not foreign to Americans abroad. They're just how life works in other countries, et cetera. And they're the ones who've been dramatically impacted by this because the effect of the transition tax was to, in effect, confiscate their pensions. Now, that, of course, is completely ignored, to the academics, et cetera. What they're doing, all right, there's something in the world of philosophy called an ad hominem argument, where instead of attacking the substance of the argument, specifically, should income be realized in order to be taxed? Well, what you do is you attack the person making the argument. And in this case, so what you do is, instead of dealing with the issue substantively, you say, well, what we really want is for Justices Thomas and Alito to be removed so they can't hear the case at all, right? Now, why do they want them removed? Well, they want them removed because of the allegations, probably substantiated in the case of Justice Thomas, probably, I don't know, and, ProPublica hasn't released enough about Justice Alito yet, to really know. But the purpose of these articles in Slate and The Guardian is to specifically not address the fairness of the issue. It is specifically not to address the tax. It is very specifically to create a climate to try to get, somehow Justice Thomas and Alito removed from being able to hear the case at all. I mean, this goes back to Roosevelt's, attempt to stack the Supreme Court of the United States, years earlier, right? I mean, history repeats itself. And, there is no doubt in my mind that the authors of these articles, I'm not saying they're not good people and that. I mean, everybody's entitled. I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is their approach to this very clearly, in its own expressed terms, is rather than deal with the issue of whether income should be realized. I mean, has it ever occurred to these people that this might be unconstitutional?
No.
That's interesting. I've never seen a single one of them ask, is this constitutional? Rather, what they're trying to do is saying, what we want to do is we want to get Justice Thomas removed so he can't hear the case. We want to get Justice Alito removed. This is what they're trying to do. So, I mean, well, on a certain level, I think these are excellent journalists who've written this stuff. And I think,
yeah, I'm going to disagree with you on that one.
But I mean, it's well researched.
Yeah. No, I mean, this is the thing.
I don't know if it's well researched.
No, it's not. Absolutely not at all. I totally disagree, John. And Keith, I'm going to have you. I'm going to get your. I just want to mention this. ProPublica is George Soros. George Soros is ProPublica. That's one of his things. So ProPublica is not this. This is just George Soros spending his money to go after. To get his same message out through the same things. These articles aren't even written by the people. I guess they're probably copy and pasted, and they're paid a small amount of money by George Soros through various ways to get this out here, because these are completely disingenuous articles that completely miss the point. Keith, this is what I'm going to go to you for right now, my friend. If these journalists actually wanted to get a story, what kind of story could they get if they actually talked to people?
Well, they would get a story like on how, where the damage is occurring are on Americans overseas with small to medium-sized businesses, and they're using those entities for retirement because that's how it's set up in their respective countries. And it is ruinous for them. I deal with this all the time. These are people who are just going about their business and they're trying to be good Americans, and they're in the U.S. tax system and they're trying to pay what they're supposed to pay and file their forms and all this. And now all of a sudden they have this retroactive tax that's going to take away all of their retirement. And what's an American overseas to do with this? They pay it, they lose all their retirement, maybe lose their business, they shut down their business, or they ignore the whole thing and pray that the IRS is not going to do anything about it because they have no assets in the United States. This is where I have a hard time with these journalists. They may be smart, they may know a lot of stuff, but I feel they're being disingenuous because they're not telling the whole story, because it does not fit their narrative.
Right. Well, exactly.
Right. And it's the little guy that's getting hurt, but that's not the Democrats' narrative they want to share.
That
the little guy is getting screwed.
Right. Interesting. Isn't that interesting? They're not at all interested in the little guy at all. And here's a whole paragraph in this in the Slate article where they're saying, as ProPublica has extensively documented. Okay, what you need to say, as George Soros told us to tell you, that would be more honest, but they don't tell you that. They don't tell you, oh, there's a billionaire who's sponsoring us to write all this. Right. And that's the problem with it. Well, hey, look, billionaires are the problem, but not the billionaire telling me to write this.
And I'd like to add one last point. You know what Americans overseas with small to medium-sized businesses are breathing a sigh of relief? The ones who have never entered the U.S. tax system, because they are looking at this saying, there you go. There is no reason for me to do it because I enter the U.S. tax system and I get ruined. So why should I do it?
And are you going to look for Democrats to help you out? Nope. They're telling you, right? I mean, not even any, no facts. Are there any facts of the Moore case whatsoever in here, right? And thank you, John. It is. All it is an attack on the man. You can't defeat the argument, so you attack the man. That's all it is. When you go in let me see, and maybe does the Guardian article have anything about the Moores in it whatsoever? I mean, these are really the same article, too. I mean, that's why. Oh, here it is. Okay, they do actually met this. Okay, hats off. Okay, there it is. They actually do mention it. A $40,000 investment, an 11% stake in the company, and they never got the dividends. And I mean, really, what they're doing here, and this is really what this tax code did. I think we mentioned this last time. What the tax code is doing, it's piercing the corporate veil. It's destroying the company to say, oh, yeah, that's your asset. But it's not your asset. That's not yours. You're a shareholder, and the corporate law say you have a share in it. But that money actually isn't yours. It belongs to the company. If you want those assets, you have to file a suit to break up the company, pierce the veil to say, oh, yeah, I need to take those assets. And so that's also what the law is doing. It's changing the very nature of corporate law around the globe to basically, I think, as John has said, I mean, that's why the U.S. tax code is the constitution of the world, perhaps. So at least this one does mention a $15,000 tax liability.
Anthony, can I just pause you there for 1
Absolutely.
second? Okay.
Of course.
That paragraph, starting with the tax, they argue because they never realized any gains. Okay. I think that was a very, very carefully drafted paragraph to associate them with look at this, the right-wing competitive enterprise institute.
Yeah.
Right? And
yeah.
although it pretends to tell their story,
Yeah.
it's up to do in the context of, these people are really the stooges, of these, greater interests, whatever. They also go into a lot of stuff about the Moors in the article, and
attacking the man because they can't, right? They have to attack the man.
This is trash. It's funny. It's well written. Objectively, these are excellent journalists, but
no, they're not, John. I disagree. They're whores. They're total whores. I'm sorry. They're not good journalists.
Okay.
These people should be ashamed of themselves. They should hang their head in shame for what they did, for what they're doing.
I'm just saying that they have the tools, that they have the skills, etc., which makes it more egregious.
Right. Well, I would say that they're people who understand how language is used. Absolutely. There, I agree.
That's right.
And they know how to write propaganda well. They know how to do disinformation incredibly well.
Yeah, look at this. Moore's father, Thomas Gale, economist. Look at this crap.
Right. What does this have to
do?
The
whole thing, what they're doing is they're trying to tie this. The narrative is very, very simple here in both articles. Billionaires are behind this attempt to get the U.S. Supreme Court to rule that income isn't, that realization isn't required. All these people are billionaires, therefore they're evil, et cetera, et cetera.
But not our billionaire who's paying us to do this.
Yeah. And
our billionaire's okay, though. Trust us.
Yeah. Okay. And, the real problem here is this scuzzball Clarence Thomas, who he knows billionaires. He knows
them. He knows people almost as wealthy as our billionaire. How dare he?
Well, I don't have a really, really well-developed opinion on Thomas because I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about him. I think it's a mistake. I think it's a mistake for all Supreme Court justices to hobnob around the world, on paid trips. I do agree with that. But that's not the issue in this case. Okay, it's not the issue in this case. And to try to convert, it's probably not the best behavior on Thomas's part into the issue in the case is, I think, extremely disingenuous. And again, there's absolutely nothing in this article or the Slate article that actually outlines who this thing actually impacts. By the way, if we look at the Senate Democrats, right, the axis of evil, as we all know, it'd be Senator Warren, Senator Wyden, and Senator Whitehouse. And right on cue yesterday, if you look at Whitehouse's Twitter, he tweeted the Slate article.
Mm-hmm.
Out there effectively endorsing this stuff.
Yeah. They're all big fans of the Republican law. Well, that's sort of my, the bigger problem that I have with all this. And there's plenty of problems with the Supreme Court. And I'm not going to get into that. But I would just say, well, they all hang out with billionaires. They all do. So that is that would be fair. Yeah, he hangs out with billionaires and they all do. So they all are acting probably improperly. Why are the billionaires wanting to hang out with you, dude? Why? Are you really that interesting? You probably are, but they're there for a reason. They want to influence things just like I would. I would want to, I want to have buddies in high places to help influence things. No problem. So it's something that really should be looked at. But yeah, Ron, I mean, this is, and this is what I don't get. What's the part? Okay. So we're talking about this transition tax. Okay. A Republican law that was signed into law by President Trump. The Democrats are now supporting it 100%. And this is the other thing too. You don't hear the Republicans at all. Kevin McCarthy's dead silent on this. This is his baby. And he's dead silent on it. But President Trump doesn't say anything about it.
I understand it.
I know, right? And I would say that Kevin McCarthy just did what he was told. And
but you know who else is silent about this? And maybe I'm being a little bit too. Maybe it's too soon. But the American overseas organizations are silent on this. And they're the ones that do hear about Americans overseas with small to medium-sized businesses.
Yeah, I'm
You know
not
what I mean?
surprised.
Democrats abroad,
I am
ACA.
not
I don't hear
surprised, Keith. I am not
nobody
surprised.
hearing anything, and they know darn well that it's ruining people's lives.
They know that. Well, I've been noted, one Democrat that's been coming up on the scene. I find him very interesting. I find this guy very, very interesting with the things that he says. Robert Kennedy Jr. What an interesting Democrat. He's sort of what the Democrats used to be, I think.
He's not a real Democrat.
No, I don't know.
He's not.
No, he's not a real Democrat.
That should be another. That'll be another podcast.
He is an independent. He's like Trump and Obama. Trump and Obama are the same candidate, right? In the sense that they were both independents looking for a political party to hang their voting.
I think you're completely wrong about that, but I won't get into that too much. But one thing he did say is that this is something. Hey, look, his uncle was killed. His father was assassinated. And he's convinced that, hey, look, the CIA was behind it. He flat out said the CIA did it. In addition, and this is what's relevant for this discussion today, he said there's an Operation Mockingbird. Operation Mockingbird is where the CIA has assets in the media, and they tell and they dispense stories the CIA wants out there. So the question is, would this be a story that the CIA would want out there? And that's where I'm at. I'm like, yeah, that's why I say these authors of these, because they're so disingenuous, because they don't understand it, because they're trying to advance a narrative that is so false. I mean, it's such a false narrative that divides us that this has to be written. It's such a bad article. It has to be a government project. That's kind of where I'm at.
It's lying through by omission is what it is. Okay.
It's also lying. I mean, it's flat out lying. I guess lying by omission or lying. Well, they're lying. It's called lying.
All roads lead to it being a lie. Okay?
Yeah, exactly. And so, in addition, that we know the CIA has assets in the government, that they have politicians, and they've admitted to this. What we don't know is who's who. So when I think about, well, could it be Senator Warren? Could she be a CIA asset? I'm like, yeah, probably. I mean, why not? And all these people, I think, yeah, this may be what's going on here. That is what I'm looking at, because this makes no sense unless something else is going on. That's my little.
Yeah, but you know what, Anthony? This is not the first time that these types of articles get out there.
Exactly.
And they never talk about the people who are actually harmed by it.
Exactly. That's
right.
It's
not the first time. It's
exactly,
constant.
Keith.
And especially when it comes to Americans overseas, they are always ignored. And they're the ones that really get hurt by it. And they never talk about that, ever. So this is not something new. It's just quite egregious that they missed the entire population of Americans overseas and the people who are harmed.
And I think we're left with this. Absolutely. We have good cop and bad cops. We align with our teams, and they work in conjunction. Okay, because here, think about this. Would the Democrats be able to pass the transition tax? Maybe. But wasn't it great getting the Republicans to do it? Wasn't it great? And they had it all ready to go, too. Just like FATCA. They had it all ready to go. Wouldn't you know that? Where did this come from? Who asked for it? And there's not a lot.
The objection the Democrats had to the transition tax at the time was that it didn't go far enough. Okay, that was their objection. I mean, that's been Wyden's objection.
Didn't go far enough as it.
Well, I mean, they objected to the 8-year payout, for example, right?
They wanted it all at once.
Well, they didn't. At a minimum, they didn't want the interest-free 8-year payout, and they also objected. I mean, a lot of them took the position that it just should come in at full tax at 35%.
It's just amazing.
I mean, they don't understand it very well, but what they do understand is that it's their job to hurt everyday Americans by claiming to ensure the billionaires don't get away with something. Okay, that's their modus operandi.
Yeah, you know what I'm reminded
Another
of?
way, individual Americans, but especially Americans abroad, are really caught and ignored in the narrative that sort of applies to multinational corporations and what's his name, the Amazon guy, Jeff Bezos, these wealthy Americans, etc. So it's so interesting because the pretend worry about these people or corporations getting away with something is used to destroy the lives of individuals. And how would you change this? Well, you get rid of citizenship taxation.
There you go. That would do
That's
it.
all you really need to do. But no, they don't want to do that.
No, because our tax code is the crowbar to get into all the countries in the world. That's
Well,
how they're
that's
doing it.
exactly right. I mean, I actually put up a post, I don't know, a few days ago, on this, that honestly, I think that other countries ought to be submitting amicus briefs in the Moore case to underscore, I mean, how the U.S. exports its immoral tax policies into other countries. Every U.S. citizen is carrying the virus, if you will, of citizenship taxation. They go to another country, they infect the country. I mean, American citizens are the COVID-19 of viruses.
I would say so. Yeah. Let me just get this. I want to get this back up here. This article here. Okay. So, and this is where who is talking here. So this is Professor Rosenthal who says this. For the Supreme Court to reach out and take a case that is not really a controversy is tremendously dangerous, he said. Why are the billionaires being able to pull the string of U.S. Supreme Court justices like puppets? So, Professor Rosenthal, why is George Soros able to pull your string like a puppet? Why you?
Outrageous statement by this guy. Yeah. Absolutely outrageous. Okay.
Who's pulling his strings? Huh? Who's paying you, buddy?
Issue here. There's a real issue which seems to escape this person.
This is
not a controversy. Oh my God, what a moron!
Right. Well, this is why I'm saying, John, like these people who wrote this article, yes, they're talented writers, talented at giving disinformation. Well, where's the counter argument to this? This isn't a controversy. Wait a second. You pass a law that taxes unrealized income, and you're saying, well, come on, that's not a big deal. You know what, Professor Rosenthal? I bet if that was your money, you'd have a different opinion on that one. I bet you would. And that's why what we need is for any law, tax law that hits any American should also hit every tax professor. Every tax professor needs to be hit by the things they want. But really, he doesn't have to worry about it, right? He gets what? He gets a W-2 from wherever.
He's a
but that's all right. I got a great life. I got people kissing my butt all day long, and who knows what George Soros is giving him? Maybe Are you getting trips? You're claiming everyone's doing all this. I want to take a look at what you're doing.
Okay.
You're claiming it's okay.
Anthony, let's stop here for a second. Okay. I want to ask both of you a question, and I want you to think before answering. Have you been able to find anything in the media or discussion from tax academics or any other kinds of academics that actually has any concern for the question of whether it's constitutional to impose taxes on income that's never been received? I can't find that anywhere. I mean, do you?
No, I haven't seen anything.
I've never. This is right. These are arguments.
Isn't that the issue here? Isn't that the issue?
Mm-hmm.
That they're conveniently trying to ignore and magnify the ignoring it, by trying to shift blame to Justice Thomas or Alito or something. I mean, this is outrageous.
Yeah. Well, then, and this is kind of a funny quote too here. I mean, really, Rifkin also has a relationship with Alito, who he interviewed for 2 stories that were published in Wall Street's editorial page. Okay, so interviewing a source is now, you look at that connection you had there. Well, then, okay. Which centered on Alito's grievances with journalism. You mean journalistic hacks like yourself, who take the marching orders from George Soros, and yet you claim to be on the side of what exactly? What exactly? Yeah, well, maybe Alito has a grievance with journalists like yourself. Exposed his relationship with Republican donors. Well, isn't that public record? I don't know about exposing. and the Senate's desire to address the justice's violation of disclosure laws. Wait. Tell me about the Senate there. Who's in the Senate? Who is that paragon of virtue? Can they point to that paragon of virtue in the U.S. Senate? Can they point to anyone who is their paragon of virtue? They go for Dick Durbin. Oh, there's another.
Let's not do what they're doing. Let's not do what they're doing. Okay, let's not get sort of dragged into their intellectual swamp. Okay, the issue here is plainly and simply, all right, whether to tax income that has not been received by an individual as though they had received it can, in some circumstances, violate the 16th Amendment. That's the issue. Okay. Now, that issue, I think, can be influenced, obviously, by the context. I think this is a particularly egregious context. And I doubt very much, by the way, though, my guess is that this is going to be a very contextual decision, something to the effect that there are circumstances under which the fact of not receiving income would mean that would violate the 16th Amendment. And this is another thing. I don't even think these people are even discussing this issue intelligently at all. And I would call on these these academics and that to let their partisan nonsense go for a minute and actually discuss the issue and the context of this thing. What they try to do is they conflate. To give you an example of something, in my view, I admit it's my view, is particularly outrageous, is they say, well, as you know, Anthony, if you have a partnership, okay, it's not taxed. The income is not taxed at the partnership level. It's taxed to the individual partners, right? And they say that, well, if the court were to rule that income has to be received, that it would sort of interfere with that type of problem. It doesn't interfere with that type of problem at all, because you're dealing with real income, realized at a particular time. It's just a question of, who has to pay the tax on it. That is light years away from the situation we're looking at, which to begin with is not real income in real time. Duh. It's 31 years back in time. So it's not that. 2, okay, it's the attribution of income from a separate foreign legal entity to the individual. Sure, I agree with, people that that's been going on for years under the Subpart F regime, but I would point out that has been restricted to passive income, not active business income. And there are few CFC rules in the world that go after active business income. So it is contrary to the ridiculous assertions made by these people. It is, in fact, a new tax. I think there's plenty of room for the court to come down with a decision which probably is not acceptable to anybody, actually, but a decision that's going to say something like this, okay? You know what? The question of whether somebody has to have the income in their hot little hands in their bank account is maybe too big for us to answer at the moment, but we will say this, that to go back 31 years and take the income of a foreign corporation and force a real live person in current time to put that on their tax return, you know what? That violates the 16th Amendment. So we'll leave it at that. And we'll discuss the rest of this as it evolves contextually. This is not an all or nothing thing, regardless of how the issue has been framed by the Supreme Court. Remember, if you go back to the constitutional attack on the Obamacare thing, at the very end, you may recall that Roberts upheld the thing on the basis that it was actually a tax and not Medicare, right? So, it's not like there's no precedent, for the Supreme Court, reaching in and perhaps doing something a little bit different. But the simple fact here is that this is, other than possibly in relation to multinationals who received a tax rate reduction from 35% to 21%. For everybody else, this is so outrageous that when this came out, I talked to people who thought I was lying, that such a thing was not even possible. It was so outrageous.
Well, thank you for bringing that up, because and I think one of my latent fears or one of my latent surprises at this is I'm not really expecting a lot from the Supreme Court either. The Supreme Court did ratify Obamacare. It did go and say, well, it's a tax, so we can do it. So, one thing that we know about the federal government is the federal government loves more federal government. And what's more federal government than taxation? The Supreme Court again and again will always rule in favor of, and in rare instances, it's a rubber stamp for whatever the government wants to do. That's what it is. So that, I'm like, well, maybe I'm reading these articles with a little bit of false hope. Like, well, they're really concerned over this. They're really concerned. Maybe they're really concerned because they know that all the non-realizable events that the code is taxing on, those may too go away, and that we may find a more clearer definition of the test for income. But even if we do that, that still doesn't really get us to a better place. We are still overruled by, or we are still ruled by a tax code that none of us really consent to. Nobody really knows what it is, regardless of how the Supreme Court could kick out everything, all of these law, everything to do with unrealized gains. They could kick them all out. We are still stuck with a code that no one can quite understand. We're still stuck with punitive things that Americans around the world have to deal with. This is just one. This is probably the most obnoxious kernel of law that's coming up here, and it, the whole process. Now, I want to talk about one thing. I want to talk about is I highlighted this part on the article in the Guardian article. It was estimated that the MRT would raise $340 billion in tax revenue. Okay, do you guys remember what FATCA was supposed to bring in?
200 billion. 200
Yeah.
billion.
Yeah.
How much did and then what was the admission? Was it not even a million or not even a billion? I think it was like 800 million the last I checked. And they were trying to claim that penalties associated with it were like, they were trying to claim that FBAR penalties were associated with the fact that it wasn't. But I believe it was around $1 billion. Now it's probably a little more because that was a few years ago. So they claim one thing. So, if I was a reporter, if I was a journalist, if I was somebody who considered myself a journalist, I'm like, oh, well, that was the claim. Let me go research the claim. Well, what happened since 2017? Did $340 billion in tax revenue occur?
No, actually, there's some stuff out on that issue from the the people in the U.S. government. No, it's been way short.
Oh, imagine that.
I know that, right?
Imagine that. A lie by Congress. You're not going to believe it, but Congress lied to us again. Imagine that.
Anthony, you can say Congress lied, and you think more highly of Congress than I do. All right, this is the interesting thing. All right,
Yeah.
I don't even think they understand enough to lie. I think they can make false statements. I think they can make true statements. I think they can make no statements.
Yes.
All right, but because they are just so fundamentally ignorant. All right, these people, they're not even capable of a lie. They're capable of making statements that turn out to be false, right? They have no way of, of understanding any of this stuff. And also remember that these estimates, they're always self-serving, as a way to try to somehow, justify what's going on. But
and I agree with you that I don't believe they even have their own agency. So I do agree with you that individual members probably don't have they have a capacity to lie on some things. But when it comes down to laws, well, they don't even know what's in them. And they're just told what to do.
On the level of, last night I saw you in such and such a restaurant, and they were there, and they say, well, I wasn't there.
They can lie on that, but on substantive issues of law, right, they don't have enough knowledge.
That's right.
A capacity. So I agree with you. However, so I'm looking at the collective. When you put everything in the collective of Congress generally is lying because the end result is an entity of things that aren't true. But small. I think we agree on the fundamental level. I don't think Kevin McCarthy understood one thing of this. He was told, like, here, this is what we want.
They didn't know anything about it. Okay?
They didn't know one thing. No, and I don't think Trump knew. I don't think Trump understood it. He's like, I want a tax cut. I want a tax cut. Okay, great. We got a tax cut.
That's right. Let there be a tax cut.
And there was a tax cut, and it just sort of had this weird thing. So yeah, 340 billion. I gotta take a look at that to see what we're up to there. 340 billion.
Anthony, another way of looking at this is that, the effect of the transition tax was that individuals subsidized the taxation of multinationals. So what I think is anybody who's listening, Keith, maybe put this up in your group and get members of the group. I think they should all pick out their favorite multinational, say Apple, Google, and write.
Yeah, right.
Hi, Apple. You know what? I'm so pleased to have subsidized your tax cut, by my life being ruined. But because I believe in you, I'm happy to do that. That get a bunch of letters in.
I think Keith. Yeah. What do you think there? What do you think about that?
Sure. Why not?
Yeah. Well, Keith, I want to. We're running on short on time, so I want to just finish with Keith just about the human aspect of this. What else can you? I think we should conclude with you, Keith, as John and I have been talking about the legal part, and that I think this is really what it comes down to is the people, though.
Yeah, it does come down to the people, and I don't know much more to say than what I said before. I just am very disgusted. I mean, it's just the lack of understanding or curiosity of these journalists of not really delving into the issues and to even think, I wonder who this is really hurting. Just asking that question in itself, where it's so out there. It's so easy to find the people who it's really hurting. And I just don't get it. I just don't understand. And I also don't understand why these American overseas organizations are not up in arms about this and to stand up for Americans overseas who have businesses to say this is wrong. They will not do it. They will not do it. And I think for me personally, and this is not just shooting from the hip because I've been at this for a long time, I think that, the majority of American overseas organizations do not understand it. They don't understand the American immigrant. They don't understand the American business person overseas who have these small to medium-sized businesses. They don't understand it at all. Therefore, they don't stand up. That's just my thoughts. So I just work with the people I can.
Why turn this into such an intellectual exercise? It's very, very simple. They just want the vote of Americans abroad.
Right. That's it.
Okay.
That's it.
That's all it is.
They'll raise up a few little carrots and all that around election time saying, yeah, we're going to fight for you and all that. And then they get the vote and then they disappear, and it's, but then again, I have to say the people that succumb to it are Americans overseas. So.
Oh yeah, no, there's no question about it. Absolutely no question about it. I think a certain segment of them are actually, they think that citizenship-based taxation validates the value of their American citizenship or something like that.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah.
They're not doing anything about this at all. Question. But listen, let's just consider this for a second, okay, on a more, getting out of the emotions level and stuff like this. What this is, I mean, anybody who thinks the media doesn't matter in framing the debate is clearly wrong, okay? Because
of course
it is the use of the Guardian, particularly given that it's not an American publication, right?
Yeah.
The use of the Guardian.
Yeah, I love it, right?
International credibility, regardless of what you think about it, right? To completely distort the issue in the sense that it unbalances what's going on is really quite amazing. And I do not believe for a minute that the authors of the Guardian article do not understand the second part of this issue, that is who it affects. They've simply chosen to not illuminate it at all.
Right. That's John. That's why it's hard to get the emotion out of it, especially when you and I'm sure Anthony and me deal with people who are being ruined by it. So it's hard to get that emotion out when darn well they're not telling the full story. Like you just said.
I feel very emotional about it. Okay, I just wanted to describe objectively for a moment. All right, the problem of the media in this and the framing the message. I think that needs to be understood, and I think that this is an excellent. Both these articles, which I agree with Anthony, are pretty much the same article, are really exhibit A why the media can't be trusted. I don't think the question, in fact, I think that an article ought to be written, okay, as a sort of a counterbalance to the Guardian article. They're saying, well, they're focusing on Thomas, that he needs to be recused. I think that legitimately a second article ought to be written on who put the Guardian up to writing this article in the first place.
Well, we know that it's George Soros.
Okay.
ProPublica is George Soros. That's who he is.
George Soros, whoever. But the point is that these reporters did not wake up and say, oh my
Right.
God, such an interesting issue.
Right. Exactly. Thank you. This is not a constituency-based agreement. This is AstroTurf. This is someone saying, "Oh yeah, we're gonna disingenuously frame the debate like this to confuse people about what's really at stake."
That's right.
And then what Keith said, and I think this is just the part that's so awful to read, because you're reading this as if a human being read the story, right? And you're reading this like you really don't care, though. You really don't even care. There's a total, and you read these articles like, okay, this should trigger some sort of like humanity out of you, where you would be curious to say, well, geez, why won't these people pay a $15,000 tax? That's weird. Why won't they? What is it, what they're saying? But it's just out of a hand dismissed by people who are claiming to be both sides. It's like, no, be honest. Just be honest who you are. Why don't you just, not go? Why does George Soros need to go through so many of his channels? Why can't he just tell us directly? The reason why is because he'd lose effectiveness of the message. He's trying to make it look like this is a ground, this is an organic thing, but it's the same people involved. It's all I'm sure they were on a Zoom call together where they all said, okay, here's our coordinated attack of how we're going to disingenuously frame the issue so that we can make sure the American people are completely misinformed about what this truly is.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. But I would add also that, I'm really, really disappointed at the lack of intellectual integrity coming from the academic community on this. This is absolutely outrageous.
Yeah.
Okay. It is outrageous. Even the way they describe it, is incredibly selective, trying to, talk about the attribution of income from a corporation to a shareholder without emphasizing it's a foreign corporation and the retroactivity and the fact there's only been passive income up until now, et cetera. It is so disingenuous, okay, that, one of two things is going on. Either they don't understand the issue they're talking about, which may be true in some cases, but certainly is not true in all, or they're framing the issue in a way that deliberately distorts the reality of this situation, which in some cases is clearly what they're doing.
That's well said. All right. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. And I really want to thank John for his research into this and his insight. And same thing for Keith. I really appreciate, Keith, you're really getting that human component out there and, expressing my own frustration with these articles so well. That we have something.
These are real live human beings are being ruined.
Yeah. Anthony, can we close with a question for anybody who's listening to this?
Absolutely.
Here's the question I would ask. Do you believe that people should be forced to pay tax on income they never received? I'd be interested to know what people think about that.
There we go.
That's actually what's going on here. All of a sudden, you wouldn't know that from the conversation. It's about Justice Thomas. Nothing to do with the issue. Right?
Well said. Well, thank you so much, guys. And let me just give contact information for if you're looking for some help, thinking about all roads may lead to expatriation. John might be able to help you out. Here's his email, citizensolutions@proton.mail. Then also, I love to share Keith's email because he is not a tax professional. He is a human being. And as a human being, he tries to give human being advice. And oftentimes that human being advice may be better than tax advice. So here's his email right there if you want to reach out to him. US_overseas_advocate outlook.com. Please give them a shout out. If you want
and
to.
Also, if I may add, Anthony,
Yep.
also anybody that's interested to go on Facebook, American Expatriates for Residency-Based Taxation.
There you go. Go on
that
Facebook
group.
there. We have to, George Soros has a lot of money. And we have to counter his programming with the truth. And so we rely on all of you to help spread the truth. This is Anthony Parent for Iris Medic. I thank you for watching, and be sure to subscribe and turn on your notifications so you know when we're going live. Thanks again for watching.